Hello there, and welcome back. Today we're diving into one of history's great mysteries. How did the most important trade network the world had ever seen just fade away? It's an incredible story, so let's get right into it.
I mean, really think about that for a second. For centuries, the Silk Road wasn't just a route. It was the lifeblood of empires, the very thing connecting the East and the West. And then, it was gone. Now, this wasn't some switch being flipped overnight. It was a slow, complicated unraveling. And in this explainer, we're going to untangle that story piece by piece. All right, so before we can talk about the end, we've got to appreciate just how amazing the Silk Road was at its peak. So let's go back to its golden age. This is when it was more than just a dusty trail. It was a vibrant, beating heart that pumped life across the entire Eurasian continent.
You know, calling it the Silk Road is almost a bit misleading. It was really a massive, sprawling web of different paths, an intricate network connecting China all the way to Europe. And yeah, silk was the star of the show for sure. But the real story, the bigger story, was the mind-blowing exchange of everything that makes us who we are.
The stuff being traded was incredible. You had silk and spices heading west, with gold and other goods moving east. But what's even crazier is what traveled with them. We're talking about huge, world-changing ideas. Buddhism made its journey from India into China right along these routes. Game-changing technologies like how to make paper and even gunpowder slowly made their way to the West. This was, and I'm not exaggerating, the world's first information superhighway.
And who made this all happen? People. A whole cast of characters. You had Buddhist monks carefully carrying their sacred texts for thousands of miles. You had Arab traders haggling in a dozen different languages. You had nomadic tribes who were the unsung heroes, guiding caravans and keeping them safe. And all of this converged in incredible cities like Samarkand, which became these amazing melting pots of culture and knowledge.
But you know, no golden age lasts forever. The end of the Silk Road wasn't a sudden event. It was more like a slow bleed, a series of cracks that started to form in the very foundation of this massive network, long before it finally crumbled.
So what caused these cracks? Well, at its heart, the Silk Road needed one thing above all else: stability. When you had big, powerful empires like the Tang Dynasty in China or earlier the Roman Empire, they kept the routes safe. But when those empires started to weaken and fall apart, the whole network began to fray. Suddenly, you had local wars popping up, banditry became a huge problem, and that long, dangerous journey for merchants became a massive life-or-death gamble.
Now, it wasn't just a straight line downwards. There was this fascinating period under the Mongol Empire called the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace, where things got super safe again. For a while, the routes were more secure than ever. But that was kind of the exception that proved the rule. Because when the Mongol Empire itself shattered, the chaos that came after was even worse, and the Silk Road was left more exposed and vulnerable than it had ever been before.
And that's when it happened. Right when the Silk Road was at its weakest, it was hit by a perfect storm, a devastating one-two punch that would change the world forever.
The first blow was horrifyingly biological: the Black Death. In a truly tragic twist of fate, the very thing that made the Silk Road so powerful, its incredible connectivity, became its undoing. The plague basically hitched a ride on the merchant caravans, spreading like wildfire across continents. It wiped out huge portions of the population, shattered economies, and brought long-distance trade to a screeching, devastating halt.
The second blow was a technological one. While the land routes were becoming a nightmare, a new, better option was emerging: the sea. I mean, just look at the comparison. Ships were faster, they were way cheaper, they were safer from bandits, and a single ship could carry more cargo than a whole train of camels. The economic logic was just undeniable. The future was on the water.
So, if the plague and the rise of sea travel were these deep, bleeding wounds, what came next was the final blow. It was a single, decisive moment that basically severed the main artery for good.
And here it is, the date that historians love to point to, 1453. This is when the Ottoman Empire conquered the great city of Constantinople, which was the gateway between Europe and Asia. For European traders, this was an absolute disaster.
So what did the Ottomans do? Well, they now control the toll booth. They could slap massive taxes on any goods coming through, making the overland route ridiculously expensive. In some cases, they just closed off the routes to their rivals completely. This slammed the door shut on Europe and basically forced them, out of desperation, to pour all their money and energy into finding a different way to the east, and that meant taking to the seas.
So if you take away just one thing from all this, let it be this. The Silk Road didn't just close because of one event. It came undone because of a perfect storm. You had political instability making it weak, a pandemic that devastated it, new technology that made it obsolete, and finally, a huge geopolitical power shift that cut it off. It's a really powerful reminder of just how fragile our own interconnected world can be.
And that kind of leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? We live in a world of our own modern Silk Roads. The internet, our global financial systems, our complex supply chains. When you look at what brought down the original, what do you think are the biggest threats facing our networks today? Something to think about.
And on that note, we're at the end of our journey today. If you learned something new here, or if this helped put the pieces together for you, we'd be so grateful for your support. Honestly, it's the engagement from you that allows us to keep making these explainers. And it's really easy to help out. Just taking that 1 second to hit the like button makes a huge difference. Sharing this with a friend you think might be curious is amazing. And of course, subscribing to the channel means you won't miss what we dive into next. We truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for watching.